You were never too much. You were just too real for someone who was still running from themselves. Let that sink in, because if you're here wondering whether your avoidant ex will ever come back, the real question is, will they ever stop running? And today, I'm going to show you exactly when and how that turning point happens, the 7 critical psychological stages before an avoidant ex returns, if they ever do. But first, understand this: avoidants don't come back because they miss you. They come back when they finally meet themselves. The moment an avoidant partner feels emotional intensity rising, their first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to pull away. This isn't cold-heartedness, it's conditioning. It's a survival mechanism formed long before you ever entered the picture. You see, when an avoidant ex disconnects, it's not just about ending a relationship, it's about escaping vulnerability. Closeness feels like danger, not comfort. Where you may feel love growing through connection, they feel their personal space, autonomy, and identity being threatened. And so they retreat. But here's what most people misunderstand: that initial silence, the ghosting, the sudden coldness is not always a calculated punishment. It's a deeply ingrained defense response. When an avoidant reaches their emotional limit, they feel like they're drowning, and distancing from you becomes their oxygen. To them, space equals safety. So they hit eject. They convince themselves that you're too emotional, too needy, too intense. In reality, those were just labels they used to justify their own emotional discomfort. You weren't too much, you were just a mirror. And that reflection forced them to feel things they've spent years avoiding. This is the most painful phase for the person left behind because it feels deeply personal. You gave your heart, your time, your energy, and now it feels like it was all thrown away without explanation. But this is where your power begins, understanding that their reaction says more about their emotional capacity than your worth. They didn't walk away from you. They walked away from intimacy, from vulnerability, from being seen. Because being seen requires them to face parts of themselves they're not ready to deal with. And the tragedy? Many avoidants leave before love even had the chance to mature. They assume that distance will bring relief, but what it actually brings is a delayed confrontation with their own fears. The important thing is, don't chase, don't beg, don't try to fix their discomfort with more closeness. That's like trying to calm a drowning person by hugging them tighter underwater. Instead, recognize the moment for what it is: not rejection, but reaction. A reaction rooted in fear, not logic. Let them disconnect, because what they're really disconnecting from is their own emotional truth. And eventually that truth will catch up to them. After the breakup, the avoidant ex often enters what appears to be their most confident stage. You see them smiling on social media, they're out with friends, posting gym selfies, maybe even dating again. It looks like they've moved on without a scratch. And if you're watching this from the outside, especially in the raw pain of being left, it can feel like emotional whiplash. How can someone who once held your hand, kissed your forehead, whispered promises into your ear, act like you never existed? Here's what's happening beneath the surface: it's not freedom. It's a performance of freedom. The avoidant is trying to convince themselves that letting go of you was the right decision. And because avoidants often fear dependence, they overcorrect by swinging into emotional detachment. They tell themselves, I'm better off alone. I don't need anyone. They might even feel a rush of power, a false sense of peace. But that peace is shallow. It's built on suppression, not healing. Avoidants don't immediately feel the loss because they've trained themselves not to feel. Their nervous system is wired to turn down the volume on emotion when things get intimate or intense. So what you're witnessing isn't healing, it's a numbing, a strategic emotional shutdown. That's why they can party, flirt, and even post cryptic motivational quotes about moving on while you're in bed replaying every brochure, looking for clues, crying into silence. The truth: they're not ahead of you. They're just delayed. You're in the pain now because you're brave enough to feel. They're skipping the pain for now because they're afraid of what it will say about them. And eventually that avoidance catches up. During this stage, avoidants build a mental case to justify the breakup. They rewrite history. They remember the arguments but forget the affection. They exaggerate your flaws and minimize their own. All of this is armor, a protective narrative designed to keep their guilt at bay. But here's the thing no one tells you: avoidants don't forget the people who made them feel seen. They just suppress it until the noise fades and the silence gets louder. They can only distract themselves for so long before the illusion of freedom starts to crumble. And when it does, the emotions they buried, the memories, the connection, the truth of what you shared begin to surface with force. That's when the stage shifts. Not in front of your eyes, but behind closed doors. Weeks, sometimes months go by, you haven't reached out. You haven't chased. You've started to heal, even if part of you still wonders if they ever think about you. Then without warning, something happens not to you, but to them. They're walking past a restaurant you both used to go to. A song comes on the radio. Someone mentions your name in passing. And in that fleeting moment, the avoidant who has spent so long pretending not to care feels something. It's subtle at first. A memory, a flicker, an emotional tremor in the armor they built around themselves. This is the moment when the unconscious starts to wake up. Avoidants survive by suppressing their feelings, especially the ones that make them vulnerable. But they can only suppress for so long. Emotional memories are not deleted, they're stored. And they always resurface when the mind feels safe enough to handle them. That's why this stage doesn't usually come right after the breakup. It arrives later when life has slowed down, distractions have faded, and there's nothing left to silence the thoughts that have been waiting to be heard. The trigger doesn't have to be dramatic. In fact, it's often the smallest things that open the floodgates. That cup you always drank from, that hoodie they still haven't thrown away, the way someone else's laugh sounds like yours. It starts there. Then the mind begins to spiral. Why am I thinking about them again? Why does it still hurt? This internal dialogue is uncomfortable. It shakes the certainty they had right after the breakup. The version of you they tried to erase suddenly comes back in detail. The realness, the comfort, the emotional safety they felt in moments they couldn't admit. And for the first time, the voice inside starts to whisper, what if I pushed away something good? Make no mistake, they won't act on it right away. Most avoidants won't send that I miss you message in this phase. But their emotional wall has been cracked. They'll test the water silently. Maybe view your story. Maybe ask mutual friends about you. It's a quiet curiosity that carries loud meaning. This is not just nostalgia. It's the surfacing of emotions they buried, the start of emotional accountability, and the beginning of a shift they can't undo, even if they still try to resist it. There comes a moment, and it doesn't arrive easily, when the avoidant X starts to face the one thing they've spent years running from, themselves. This is the most pivotal and often the most painful stage for them. Because for the first time, the silence is no longer soothing. The freedom they fought so hard for begins to feel empty. The emotional distance that once gave them control now feels like a cage, and in that quiet, unguarded space, reflection creeps in. Not the kind of surface-level reflection that says, we had problems. No, this is the kind that pierces through the narrative they built. The story that you were too much, that they needed space, that they had to leave for their own peace suddenly. It doesn't feel like truth anymore. It feels like defense, and when the defense drops, regret steps in. They remember the look in your eyes when you asked them to open up, the way you showed patience during their emotional walls, the times you asked for connection, not control. And they start to realize that yours wasn't the problem, their inability to receive it was. This is where the avoidant begins to see themselves differently, not as the one who escaped toxicity, but perhaps as the one who ran from depth, from vulnerability, from a real chance at intimacy. That realization is heavy, because it means they weren't just a passive passenger in the breakup, they were a creator of the disconnect. And here's the hard truth: many avoidants were never taught how to reflect in healthy ways. They don't know how to hold regret without shame. So in this stage, their reflection can swing between guilt and avoidant voice again. But the seed has been planted, and once planted, it grows. They might wonder why they shut down instead of speaking up, why they turned away when things got real, why they always push away the ones who make them feel the most loved. These aren't easy questions, but once they're asked, they can't be unasked. Sometimes this stage leads to a desire to reconnect. Other times it leads to silent apologies never voiced. But whether they reach out or not, the shift is undeniable. This is the moment the emotional walls begin to crumble, not from outside pressure, but from within. So what does all of this mean for you? It means you no longer need to live in the waiting room of someone else's growth. The stages an avoidant X moves through, from disconnect to reflection, are not a straight line. They're unpredictable, emotional, and often delayed, but they are real. And while you can't control the timing of their awakening, you can absolutely control the trajectory of your own. Because the real victory isn't about whether they come back, it's about whether you rise so high that even if they do, they have to meet a version of you they no longer recognize. Not out of bitterness, but out of evolution. Understand this: avoidants often return when you've already returned to yourself. When you've stopped obsessing over the what-ifs and started embodying the what-now. When you've shifted the spotlight from their story to your growth. Because the energy of someone who has healed is magnetic, not in a desperate way, but in a way that commands respect without asking for it. And when they feel that shift, when they see you no longer needing what once broke you, that's when the game changes. That's when the avoidant realizes they didn't leave someone weak. They left someone becoming. This entire journey is not just about understanding your avoidant ex. It's about understanding your own emotional blueprint. It's about recognizing that attachment wounds don't just show up in them, they show up in us too, in our longing, our need for closure, our willingness to accept crumbs from someone incapable of offering more. Healing isn't waiting. Healing is reclaiming. And when you do that, you start to see their silence as information, not rejection. Their delay as reflection, not punishment. You stop asking, when will they come back? And start asking, am I still the person who would accept them if they did? So if you're here wondering whether they'll return, know this, they might. But the deeper question is, will you still be the same person who once waited for them to choose you? Because if you truly walk this path, if you grow through every stage, just like they must then by the time they're ready, you won't just be healed. You'll be transformed. And that version of you, that's the version they never expected to meet, and the one they'll never forget. Thank you for watching. If this message spoke to your heart, remember, clarity begins where confusion ends, and healing starts the moment you choose yourself. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful insights like this. Your growth is your power, and your story is far from over. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never settle for anything less than the love you deserve. Goodbye for now, and remember, the best is still ahead.